I'll write part 1 of the story in approximately 1,400 words using simple English with a natural tone. I'll make it human-centric, engaging, and appropriate for YouTube policies, while avoiding common names like the ones you mentioned. Coffin Research Part 1. Type mark, text markdown, title. Scientists placed a camera in a coffin for research. Part 1. The idea first came to Dr. Eleanor Reeves on a walk through an old cemetery near her childhood home. She had always been the curious type, even as a little girl asking questions that made adults shift uncomfortably. Now, at 42, with gray streaks in her dark hair and 20 years of research under her belt, she still asked those uncomfortable questions. But these days people paid her to ask them. Eleanor stood among the weathered headstones that autumn afternoon, watching leaves spiral down from ancient oaks, when she wondered, not for the first time, what really happened beneath the soil. As an environmental scientist specializing in soil composition and biodegradation, she knew the textbook answers. But science was about observation, about seeing with your own eyes, and nobody had ever really seen. Back in her office at Westlake University, surrounded by stacks of research papers and half-empty coffee cups, Eleanor couldn't shake the thought. The traditional burial industry was one of the most environmentally problematic practices that nobody talked about. Embalming chemicals, treated woods, metal caskets designed to protect bodies from the very natural processes that should be occurring, all of it created toxic legacies in the soil that lasted centuries. "We need to see it," she muttered to herself, sketching rough designs on her notepad. "We need to actually observe what happens." Her department head, a round-faced man with kind eyes named Professor Lee, had raised his eyebrows when she first proposed the idea. "You want to put cameras inside a coffin?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Eleanor nodded, sliding her proposal across his desk. "Not just cameras, environmental sensors too. Temperature, humidity, pressure, gas composition, the works." "And who exactly is going in this coffin?" Professor Lee asked cautiously. "Nobody," Eleanor explained quickly. "It would be an empty coffin, buried at the university research site. We already have the dedicated land for environmental studies. This is just a more specific application." Professor Lee skimmed through the proposal, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. "The ethics committee will have questions." "I'm counting on it," Eleanor replied. "This could change how we approach eco-burials. If we can document exactly what happens, how materials break down or don't, we could design better systems. Less waste, less pollution, better for the planet." It took 3 months of committee meetings, revised proposals, and passionate arguments before Eleanor got her approval. By then, winter had settled over the campus and she had assembled her team. Dr. Javier Santos, a soil microbiologist with a quiet voice and brilliant mind. Amara Chen, an environmental engineer fresh from her doctorate with innovative ideas about sustainable design. And a graduate assistant named Kelly, a thoughtful young man with steady hands and a knack for technology. They gathered in Eleanor's lab on a January morning, steam rising from their coffee cups as they huddled around the table examining their equipment. "The power supply's the biggest challenge," Amara said, pointing to the diagrams. "We need something that will last at least 6 months underground without maintenance." "I've modified these solar batteries," Kelly offered. "They'll store enough power to run everything for the duration, even without direct light." Dr. Santos held up one of the specialized cameras. "These infrared sensors will give us visibility even in complete darkness, and I've designed a housing that should protect against moisture and pressure." Eleanor felt a flutter of excitement. After 20 years of research, most scientists learned to temper their expectations. Breakthroughs were rare. Progress usually came in tiny increments. But something about this project felt different, like they were crossing a boundary that had always existed between the living and what happened after. The university's research cemetery sat on the edge of campus, a carefully maintained 2 acres, surrounded by tall pines. Unlike regular cemeteries, this land was dedicated solely to scientific studies, soil composition, environmental monitoring, and the development of green burial techniques. Signs clearly marked it as a research area, not open to the public. On burial day, the February sky hung low and gray, Eleanor and her team arrived early, their breath forming clouds in the cold air as they unloaded their equipment from the university van. The groundskeeper, an older man named Thomas who had worked at the university for 30 years, helped them set up. "Never seen anything quite like this," he commented, watching as they prepared the specialized coffin. "Been here for all sorts of experiments, but this is a first." "That's the best kind of science," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "The first-time kind." The coffin itself looked ordinary from the outside, simple pine, untreated, the kind used in natural burials. But inside, they had installed a complex array of technology. Cameras positioned to capture different angles, sensors embedded in the wood, data transmitters connected to their monitoring station. Dr. Santos moved with careful precision, checking each component. "The microbe sensors are calibrated. We should be able to detect even the smallest changes in bacterial communities." Amara ran her hands along the wood. "This pine will begin breaking down within weeks. It'll be interesting to see the progression." "Everything's transmitting correctly," Kelly confirmed, looking up from his tablet. "We're getting clear signals from all devices." Eleanor felt a strange mix of scientific excitement and solemn respect as they prepared to lower the coffin into the ground. This wasn't just an experiment. It was a window into a process as old as life itself. "Ready?" she asked her team. They nodded, and Thomas operated the small mechanical lift that slowly lowered the coffin into the prepared grave. 6 feet down, exactly as tradition dictated, though Eleanor had often argued this depth was unnecessarily excessive for natural decomposition. Once positioned, they did one final check of the systems before Thomas began carefully returning soil to the grave. The team watched in silence as the earth covered their project, until only a small transmitter antenna, disguised as a simple grave marker, remained visible. Back in the small monitoring station, a weatherproof shed they'd set up nearby, screens flickered to life showing the interior of the coffin. Camera 1, the long view, showing the empty space where a body would normally rest. Camera 2, a close-up of the wooden side, grain visible in sharp detail. Camera 3, the lid from below, reinforced slightly to handle the weight of soil. Camera 4, the foot of the coffin, where they'd positioned most of their environmental sensors. "It's working," Kelly whispered, almost as if speaking too loudly might disrupt the transmission. Data began streaming onto their computers. Baseline readings of temperature, a cool 42 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 68%, pressure significantly higher than above ground as expected, and initial gas composition, mostly the oxygen and nitrogen they'd sealed inside, with trace elements. "Now we wait," Dr. Santos said, setting up the automated recording systems. But science was rarely about dramatic moments. It was about patience, observation, and the slow accumulation of data. Eleanor knew this better than most, yet she couldn't help feeling they were on the edge of something significant. The team established a rotation. Each day, someone would visit the monitoring station to check the equipment and download backup copies of the data. Kelly volunteered for most shifts, eager to ensure his modified technology performed as expected. In those first weeks, they observed exactly what they anticipated: gradual changes in temperature as the coffin equilibrated with the surrounding soil, slight increases in humidity as ground moisture began to affect the wood, minor shifts in the microbial readings as naturally occurring soil bacteria found their way through the untreated pine. Everything's proceeding according to expected parameters, Eleanor reported at their weekly meeting. 3 weeks into the experiment, the wood is beginning to show early signs of decomposition, particularly at the joins and thinner sections. "The bacterial counts are interesting," Dr. Santos added, pointing to his charts. "We're seeing species succession exactly as predicted in the literature, but now we can actually watch it happen in real time." None of them could have predicted what would begin to happen next: the subtle shifts in electromagnetic readings, the unexplained temperature fluctuations, and eventually, the discovery that would make them all shout in unified surprise. But that was still weeks away, hidden in the darkness, slowly taking form beneath their feet. For now, Eleanor simply looked at her team with quiet pride. Their unusual experiment had begun, and science, as it always did, would follow its own path to unexpected places. I've written part 1 of the story in approximately 1,400 words as requested. The narrative introduces Dr. Eleanor Reeves and her research team as they embark on their Coffin camera experiment. I've kept the language straightforward and natural, focusing on human elements like curiosity, professional relationships, and the scientific process. The story builds interest by hinting at future discoveries while keeping readers engaged with the characters' motivations and the project setup. Would you like me to adjust anything about this first part before moving on to part 2? I'll write part 2 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, continuing where part 1 left off. I'll maintain simple language with a natural tone, keep it human-centric, engaging, and appropriate for YouTube policies, while avoiding the names you mentioned. The morning frost still clung to the grass as Eleanor made her way to the monitoring station. The small building, not much bigger than a garden shed, sat at the edge of the research cemetery, its metal roof reflecting the early sunlight. 1 month had passed since they'd buried their camera-equipped coffin, and so far, the data had been predictably boring. Exactly as science should be, Eleanor reminded herself. Good research wasn't about dramatic surprises, it was about careful observation and confirmed hypotheses. She unlocked the door, the familiar smell of electronics and coffee greeting her. Kelly had obviously been there earlier. A half-empty university mug sat beside the main computer, and notes in his precise handwriting covered the whiteboard. Eleanor smiled. Her graduate assistant was thorough to a fault, often arriving before dawn to check the overnight data. The screens showed multiple views of the coffin interior, illuminated by the gentle infrared glow of their cameras. Eleanor settled into the chair and began reviewing the latest readings. Temperature, holding steady at 52 degrees. Humidity, 79% and climbing. Pressure, constant. Gas composition, showing expected increases in carbon dioxide and methane as decomposition processes advanced. She leaned closer to the screen showing camera 2, which focused on the side wall of the coffin. Small beads of moisture had formed on the wood, and the grain seemed more pronounced than before. Early signs of decomposition, right on schedule. The door opened behind her, bringing a gust of cold air. "You're in early," Dr. Santos said, unwrapping his scarf as he entered. "Just checking the morning data," Eleanor replied. Kelly's notes mention some unusual electromagnetic fluctuations overnight. "Have you seen anything like that in your readings?" Dr. Santos set down his bag and joined her at the monitors. "I noticed something similar 2 days ago. Brief spikes, then back to baseline. I thought it might be equipment interference." 3 times. "Is a pattern," Eleanor murmured, pointing to the graph on the secondary monitor. "Look, 3 distinct spikes over the past week, each lasting approximately 4 minutes, each occurring between 2 and 4 a.m. "Could be temperature-related, Doctor," Santos suggested. "The coldest part of the night might be causing some contraction in the coffin materials, maybe creating static discharge." "Maybe," Eleanor said, unconvinced. "Let's ask Amara to take a look at the structural sensors when she comes in. If the wood is shifting, we should see corresponding pressure changes." The door opened again, bringing Amara and a blast of cold air. The young engineer stamped her feet and rubbed her gloved hands together. "Why do we always schedule field research in winter?" she complained good-naturedly. "Because we're scientists and suffering is part of the job description," Dr. Santos replied with a wry smile. Eleanor explained the electromagnetic anomalies while Amara hung up her coat and poured herself coffee from the small machine in the corner. "Interesting," Amara said, warming her hands on the mug. "Let me check the structural data." She moved to the 3rd computer station and began pulling up charts and readings. After several minutes of silence, she frowned. "That's odd." "What?" Eleanor and Dr. Santos asked simultaneously. "The pressure sensors don't show any significant movement or contraction in the wood," Amara explained. "But look at the soil pressure readings around the coffin. She pointed to a graph showing subtle but distinct shifts in the surrounding earth. It's almost like something's moving around the coffin, not inside it. Burrowing animals? Dr. Santos suggested. Moles or voles could be, attracted to the warmth difference. Eleanor shook her head. Not at that depth and not in this cold. Besides, we'd see more disturbance in the soil readings if something that size were tunneling. The door swung open once more, and Kelly rushed in, his cheeks flushed from the cold, clutching his tablet. "You need to see this," he said breathlessly. "I was reviewing the night footage frame by frame, and there's something. I can't explain it." The three older researchers gathered around as Kelly connected his tablet to the main display. He pulled up a series of still images taken from camera 4 at the foot of the coffin, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. "Watch the corner," he instructed, starting a slow-motion playback. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just the infrared view of the wooden interior. Then, almost imperceptibly, a small point of light appeared in the corner. It lingered for a moment before disappearing, only to reappear slightly larger a few frames later. "Could be a reflection," Amara suggested. "Maybe moisture catching the infrared light." "That's what I thought," Kelly replied. "But look what happens next." The playback continued, and the small light began to move, not randomly but in what appeared to be a deliberate path along the edge of the coffin. Then another pinpoint of light appeared, followed by another. Within 30 seconds, 5 distinct points of light were moving independently around the interior space. "That's not normal," Dr. Santos said quietly. "It gets better," Kelly continued, switching to footage from camera 1, which showed the length of the coffin. The same lights were visible, but from this angle, they appeared to be traveling in a pattern, almost like a slow dance, moving closer together then farther apart. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning. "When does this stop?" "After about 4 minutes," Kelly answered. "They fade out one by one, and then everything goes back to normal. But here's the interesting part. The electromagnetic spikes happen exactly when these lights appear and disappear." The 4 researchers stared at the screen, watching the mysterious lights complete their silent movement before vanishing. Scientific training urged caution, skepticism, rational explanation. But human nature couldn't help but feel a flicker of something deeper, more primal. "We need more data," Eleanor said finally, breaking the silence. "Let's add another camera with higher resolution, and let's get some spectrum analysis on those lights. If they're biological in origin, maybe bioluminescent bacteria or fungi, they should have a specific wavelength signature." "I can modify one of our spare cameras," Kelly offered. "Add a spectrographic filter." "I'll recheck all the environmental sensors," Amara added. "Make sure we're not missing anything." "And I'll collect soil samples from around the site," Dr. Santos said. "If there's unusual microbial activity, it might show up in the surrounding earth first." Eleanor nodded, feeling the familiar rhythm of scientific problem-solving replace the momentary unease. This was why they were here, to observe, question, and understand. The next 2 weeks brought more questions than answers. The lights appeared regularly, always during the early morning hours, always for approximately 4 minutes, always with the corresponding electromagnetic spikes. The new camera confirmed they weren't reflections or equipment malfunctions, and the spectrographic analysis showed something even more puzzling. The lights emitted wavelengths consistent with certain bioluminescent fungi, but no known species could survive in the closed environment of the coffin, much less emerge weeks after burial. On a particularly cold night in late February, all 4 researchers found themselves at the monitoring station, surrounded by printouts, sample containers, and the soft glow of computer screens. Outside, a storm was brewing, with weather reports warning of heavy snow by morning. "The soil samples show increased fungal activity," Dr. Santos reported, looking up from his microscope. "Several species I would expect, but also some I've never seen before. They appear to be consuming the wood at an accelerated rate." That matches what I'm seeing with the structural sensors, Amara said, pointing to her charts. The integrity of the coffin is declining faster than our models predicted, especially in the areas where those lights appear most frequently. The university called, Eleanor mentioned, checking her phone. They're closing campus tomorrow due to the storm. We should probably head back before the roads get bad. Just a few more minutes, Kelly said, eyes fixed on the live feed. The lights usually appear around now, and I've got the new high-definition camera recording. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the small building's lights flickered momentarily. The monitoring equipment, protected by backup power supplies, continued running smoothly. Storm's getting closer, Dr. Santos observed, moving to the window to look at the darkening sky. Suddenly, Kelly straightened in his chair. There. Look. On the main screen, a pinpoint of light had appeared in the coffin, brighter than before with a distinctive blue-green glow. Then another appeared and another, until dozens of tiny lights filled the screen, more than they'd ever seen. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, Amara reported, watching her monitor. Thunder crashed directly overhead, and for a brief moment the power failed completely before the backup generators kicked in. The screens flickered, went dark, then came back, online, and what they saw made all four scientists cry out in unison. The entire interior of the coffin was glowing now, not with random points of light, but with an intricate web-like structure that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. The pattern spread across every surface, up the sides, across the lid, along the bottom, creating what looked like a living circuit board of light. "What in the world?" Eleanor whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Dr. Santos was the first to recognize what they were seeing. "It's a mycelium network," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "A fungal communication system. But I've never seen one this organized, this deliberate." Another crash of thunder, and through the speakers came a sound none of them had heard before, a soft, rhythmic clicking that perfectly matched the pulsing of the light network. The four researchers stood in stunned silence, watching as the most mundane of natural processes, fungal decomposition, revealed itself to be something far more complex and beautiful than any of them had imagined. Their shouts of surprise had turned to speechless awe, and in that moment, beneath the rumbling sky and within the quiet darkness of their buried coffin, science and wonder became one and the same. I've written part 2 of the story, continuing from where part 1 ended. This section develops the mystery as the research team begins to notice unusual phenomena in their coffin experiment. The narrative builds tension through the discovery of strange lights and electromagnetic readings, culminating in the dramatic revelation during the thunderstorm. I've maintained simple language and a natural, human-centric tone while keeping the content engaging and appropriate for YouTube. The story now sets up for part 3, where the team will likely investigate this remarkable fungal network discovery further. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this second part before continuing to the next section? I'll write part 3 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, continuing the narrative while maintaining simple language, a natural tone, and engaging content that's human-centric and appropriate for YouTube policies. The snow from the overnight storm had blanketed the university campus in white silence. Despite the closure, all 4 scientists had returned to the monitoring station at dawn, drawn by a shared urgency to understand what they had witnessed. The small building's heater worked overtime against the February chill, creating a warm bubble of scientific excitement amid the winter landscape. "It's still active," Kelly announced, pointing to the main screen where the glowing fungal network continued to pulse throughout the coffin. "It's been over 6 hours now. Whatever this is, it's not just a brief phenomenon." Dr. Santos hadn't left his microscope since they'd arrived. The soil samples he'd collected before the storm now consumed his attention. His dark eyes narrowed. In concentration, "I've never seen anything like this cellular structure," he murmured, adjusting the focus. "The fungi have developed specialized hypha, branching filaments that appear to conduct electrical signals. It's almost like a nervous system." Eleanor stood by the windows, coffee cup clutched in both hands, watching snowflakes swirl outside, while her mind raced through possibilities. 20 years of research had taught her that the most important scientific moments often came disguised as anomalies, the unexpected data points that didn't fit existing theories. "We need to be methodical," she said finally, turning back to her team. "Let's not jump to conclusions. What do we know for certain?" Amara looked up from her computer. The network appeared suddenly during the thunderstorm. The electrical activity might have triggered some kind of growth response, or made visible something that was already there, Kelly suggested. Maybe the network was developing all along but only became visible when energized by the lightning. The clicking sounds matched the pulse pattern exactly, Dr. Santos added. Some kind of communication or signaling between different parts of the network. Eleanor nodded, moving to the whiteboard mounted on the wall. She began writing, organizing their observations into categories: known, suspected, and unknown. Under known, she listed fungal network with bioluminescent properties, electrical conductivity, accelerated wood decomposition, rhythmic sound, production. Under suspected, she wrote response to electrical stimuli, communication network, novel species or adaptation. The unknown column was longest: origin of species, purpose of light patterns, reason for organized structure, environmental triggers, potential applications. "I think we need to consult with Dr. Wu in mycology," Eleanor said, capping the marker. "This goes beyond our collective expertise." "Before we bring in others, shouldn't we gather more data?" Amara asked, her expression thoughtful. "Once word gets out about what we've found, we'll lose control of the research. Everyone will want a piece of this." It was a valid concern. Academic science could be as competitive as any business, with researchers racing to publish first, establish priority of discovery, and secure the grants and recognition that followed. What they had stumbled upon could be career-defining for all of them. "We'll need to document everything meticulously," Eleanor agreed. "Kelly, can you set up continuous recording on all cameras? I want every second of this network's activity captured." "Already done," Kelly replied. "And I've backed everything up to secure servers. Nothing's getting lost." "We should take core samples from around the burial site," Dr. Santos suggested. "See how far this fungal network extends into the surrounding soil. I can modify some of our sensors to measure the electrical output more precisely," Amara offered. "If this network is generating its own electrical field, we should be able to map it." Eleanor felt a familiar thrill, the collaborative energy of a research team in pursuit of understanding. This was science at its most fundamental. Observe, question, test, repeat. By mid-afternoon, they had established a new research protocol. Kelly remained at the monitoring station, documenting the network's activity. Dr. Santos and Amara bundled up against the cold to collect soil samples in a grid pattern around the burial site. Eleanor sequestered herself with the existing data, looking for patterns they might have missed. The coffin, 6 feet below the snow-covered ground, had become a universe unto itself, a self-contained ecosystem where something remarkable was happening. The fungal network continued to glow and pulse, its blue-green light illuminating the decomposing wood from within. When Dr. Santos and Amara returned, their cheeks red from the cold and their sample containers full, they found Eleanor staring intently at footage from the previous weeks. "I think it was there all along," she said without looking up. "Watch this time-lapse from the past month." On screen, the interior of the coffin seemed normal at first. Then, playing at high speed, almost imperceptible changes became visible. Tiny spots of brightness appearing and disappearing, gradual darkening of the wood in certain patterns, subtle shifts in texture that formed web-like structures long before they began to glow. "The network was developing since the beginning," Eleanor continued. "The thunderstorm just provided enough energy to activate its bioluminescent properties. That would explain the electromagnetic fluctuations we recorded," Amara said, pulling off her gloves. "The fungi were creating their network, and our sensors detected the tiny electrical impulses." Dr. Santos began preparing the new soil samples for analysis. "If this network extends beyond the coffin, which I suspect it does, we're looking at something with potentially massive implications for soil remediation, communications technology, even medical applications. The afternoon stretched into evening as they worked, the snow outside now reflecting moonlight. None of them suggested leaving. They ordered takeout from a local restaurant that had braved the weather to stay open, eating between tests and observations. The electrical output is increasing, Amara reported around 8 p.m., studying her modified sensors, and becoming more organized, less like random discharges and more like coherent pulses. The clicking has changed too, Kelly noticed. It's faster now and has a different pattern, almost like... Like what? Eleanor prompted when he trailed off. Kelly hesitated. I know this sounds crazy, but it's almost like Morse code. There's a rhythm to it. Short clicks, long clicks, pauses. The four researchers fell silent, listening to the soft sounds coming through the speakers. What had initially seemed like random noise now did indeed have a noticeable pattern. 3 short clicks, 3 long clicks, 3 short clicks, followed by a pause, then repeating. That's SOS, Dr. Santos whispered. The international distress signal. Coincidence, Amara said firmly. Fungal networks don't send distress signals in Morse code. Of course not, Eleanor agreed. But pattern recognition is one of humanity's strongest traits. We see faces in clouds and hear words in wind. We're probably imposing meaning on random sounds. Yet even as she spoke, a chill ran through her. The pattern was unmistakable once heard. The universal call for help, coming from a fungal network, growing in an empty coffin. Let's be scientific about this, Dr. Santos suggested, his voice carefully neutral. If it's truly sending a pattern, we should be able to respond and see if it reacts. How? Kelly asked. We installed speakers in the coffin for acoustic monitoring, Amara reminded them. We could use them to transmit sounds back. This is absurd, Eleanor said, but without conviction. We're talking about communicating with fungi. We're talking about testing a hypothesis, Dr. Santos corrected gently. If we send a pattern and nothing happens, we've eliminated one possibility. After a brief debate, they decided to proceed. Amara configured the speakers while Kelly created a simple program to transmit 3 short tones, 3 long tones, and 3 short tones again. SOS echoed back. Ready? Amara asked, finger poised over the keyboard. Eleanor nodded, feeling simultaneously foolish and exhilarated. This was either a waste of time or one of the most important moments in her scientific career. Amara pressed enter, and the signal transmitted to the buried coffin. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The fungal network continued its rhythmic pulsing and clicking unchanged. The scientists exchanged glances, part relief, part disappointment. Then, abruptly, the pattern changed. The glowing network flickered rapidly and the clicking accelerated. On the screen, they watched as the web-like structure began to reconfigure itself, glowing filaments shifting position, creating new connections, and breaking old ones. It's responding, Kelly whispered. Within minutes, the network had formed a distinctly new pattern, concentric circles radiating outward from a central point, pulsing with light that moved from the center to the edges and back again. The clicking had changed too. No longer the SOS pattern, but something more complex. A rhythm with variations in tone and timing that none of them could immediately decode. It's communicating, Dr. Santos said, his voice filled with wonder. Not like a human, not with language as we understand it, but it's responding to stimulus in a non-random way. This changes everything, Eleanor said quietly. If this fungal network can detect and respond to external signals, we need to run more tests, Amara insisted. Multiple patterns, different frequencies. See if the responses are consistent or random. Through the night, they worked in shifts, sending various signal patterns to the buried coffin and documenting the network's responses. By dawn, they had compiled enough data to confirm what seemed impossible. The fungal network was not only reacting to their signals, but appearing to learn from them, with each response becoming more complex. As morning light filtered through the windows of the monitoring station, the four exhausted researchers faced a profound question. What exactly had they discovered? Was this merely an unusually responsive biological system, or something that blurred the very definitions of consciousness and communication? Whatever the answer, they knew their simple research project had uncovered something that would challenge scientific understanding and open doors to possibilities none of them had imagined when they first placed a camera in a coffin. I've written part 3 of the story, continuing the narrative as the research team investigates the mysterious fungal network discovered in their experimental coffin. This section develops the scientific mystery while introducing a potentially communication aspect to the fungal network. The story builds tension through the team's attempts to understand and interact with their discovery. I've kept the language simple and accessible while maintaining scientific plausibility and human-centric storytelling. The narrative avoids any content that would violate YouTube policies while remaining engaging throughout. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this third part before continuing to the next section? I'll write part 4 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, continuing the narrative with simple language, a natural tone, and engaging content that's human-centric and appropriate for YouTube policies. Title: Scientists placed a camera in a coffin for research. Part 4. 3 days had passed since they discovered the responsive fungal network, and none of the researchers had gone home. They'd fallen into a rhythm of short naps on the cot they'd brought in, takeout meals, and endless hours of observation and testing. The university remained closed due to the heavy snowfall, giving them unexpected privacy for their increasingly extraordinary research. Eleanor stood at the small window watching the sunset paint the snow-covered campus in shades of orange and pink. Behind her, the soft glow of computer screens and the gentle clicking sounds from the buried coffin created an almost meditative atmosphere in the monitoring station. "We need to talk about what happens next," she said, turning to face her team. Fatigue lined her face, but her eyes were bright with the excitement of discovery. Kelly looked up from his computer, where he'd been analyzing pattern variations in the fungal responses. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've confirmed that this network responds consistently to our signals. It's not random, and it's not our imagination." Eleanor moved to the whiteboard, where their latest findings were meticulously charted. "We need to decide if we're ready to share this with the wider scientific community." Dr. Santos rubbed his eyes tiredly. "The question is whether anyone will believe us. This sounds like science fiction. A fungal network that communicates, that responds to Morse code and appears to learn from interaction, will be laughed out of academia." "Not if we have irrefutable evidence," Amara countered. She'd spent the morning designing more sensitive instruments to measure the network's electrical outputs. "And we do. The data is clear." "Clear to us," Dr. Santos replied. "We've been watching it happen. But you know how science works. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." Eleanor nodded. This was the challenge they faced. What they'd discovered went beyond unusual. It challenged fundamental assumptions about communication, responsiveness, and perhaps even consciousness in simple organisms. "We need something definitive," she said, "something that can't be explained away as equipment malfunction or misinterpretation." "Like what?" Kelly asked. "I'm not sure yet," Eleanor admitted. "But I think—" A sudden alert from the main computer interrupted her. All 4 researchers turned toward the screen where a warning message flashed. "Environment change detected. Oxygen levels in the coffin are rising," Amara reported, quickly checking the readings. "And carbon dioxide is decreasing. That shouldn't be possible in a sealed environment. Temperatures climbing, too," Kelly added, "up 2 degrees in the last hour." Dr. Santos moved to his microscope where he'd been examining the most recent soil samples. "The fungal activity in these samples has increased exponentially since this morning. Whatever's happening down there is accelerating." Eleanor felt a familiar mix of scientific excitement and caution. Every instinct told her they were approaching a critical moment in their research, a tipping point where understanding might suddenly expand. "Put all cameras on maximum resolution," she instructed. "Record everything. Whatever's happening, we need to document it completely." On the screens, the fungal network continued its rhythmic pulsing, but the pattern had changed. Instead of concentric, Circles, the glowing filaments had reorganized into spiral formations that rotated slowly, clockwise then counterclockwise, as if searching for something. The clicking has stopped, Kelly noticed, adjusting the audio controls. Complete silence for the first time since the network appeared. For several tense minutes they watched and waited, the only sounds in the monitoring station their own, breathing and the gentle hum of equipment. Then, without warning, everything changed. The network flared with brilliant blue-green light, so intense it momentarily oversaturated the cameras. When the image stabilized, they saw that the spiral formations had vanished, replaced by a dense interconnected web that covered every surface of the coffin's interior. The wood itself seemed to be glowing now, as if illuminated from within. "My God," Dr. Santos whispered. "The fungi aren't just growing on the wood. They're integrating with it, transforming it at a cellular level." As they watched, transfixed, the wooden surfaces began to change texture, becoming less defined, more fluid. The straight lines and sharp corners of the coffin softened, curved, as if the solid structure was becoming malleable. "The sensors are going crazy," Amara reported, her voice tight with excitement or fear, perhaps both. "Temperatures rising rapidly, electrical activity off the charts, and this can't be right. The mass readings are increasing. The system is registering more physical matter than was there before." "That's impossible," Eleanor said automatically, even as her mind raced to reconcile the impossible with what her eyes were seeing. "Matter can't be created from nothing." "Not created," Dr. Santos suggested, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Transformed. The fungi are rearranging the molecular structure of the wood, possibly incorporating elements from the surrounding soil through their extended network." Before any of them could respond, a new sound emerged from the speakers. Not the clicking they'd grown accustomed to, but a low harmonic hum that rose and fell in a complex rhythm. The sound seemed to resonate within the small building, making coffee cups vibrate on the desk and sending a strange tingling sensation through their bodies. On screen, the transformed interior of the coffin pulsed in perfect synchronization with the humming. The boundaries between fungi, wood, and empty space had become indistinct, all of it now part of a single unified system that breathed and moved as one entity. "It's beautiful," Kelly murmured, breaking the stunned silence. And it was. Despite the strangeness, despite the impossibility of what they were witnessing, none of them could deny the haunting beauty of the transformation. Nature, given the right conditions and left undisturbed, had created something beyond their scientific understanding but undeniably magnificent. The humming gradually changed pitch, becoming higher, almost musical. As it did, the glowing substance within the coffin began to concentrate, flowing together toward the center like luminous water finding its lowest point. The researchers watched, barely breathing, as the glow formed a distinct shape. Oblong, approximately 5 feet in length, with what appeared to be smaller extensions from a central mass. "It almost looks like," Amara began, then stopped herself. "Like a person," Kelly finished quietly. "A glowing outline of a human body." Eleanor felt goosebumps rise on her arms. The shape was indeed unmistakably human-like, not detailed, but a luminous suggestion of head, torso, limbs, all formed from the fungal network that had begun as tiny separate points of light in the buried coffin. Dr. Santos stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "This changes everything we thought we knew about decomposition, about life cycles, about the very definition of life itself." "What are you saying?" Eleanor asked, though part of her already understood. "I'm saying that perhaps the boundary between life and death isn't as clear as we've always believed." Dr. Santos gestured toward the screen. "These fungi don't just break down organic matter, they transform it, reorganize it, perhaps even preserve some fundamental essence of what came before." "That's a massive leap," Amara cautioned. "We're observing unusual fungal behavior in an empty coffin, not resurrection." "Of course," Dr. Santos agreed quickly. "I'm not suggesting anything supernatural, just that our understanding of biological processes after death might be incomplete. These fungi might be capable of preserving and transmitting information, electrical patterns, chemical signatures that we haven't recognized before. The human-shaped glow on the screen pulsed gently, the humming sound maintaining its musical quality. Despite the rational explanations being discussed, Eleanor couldn't shake a profound sense of witnessing something sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the way that certain natural phenomena inspired reverence. "What do we do now?" Kelly asked, his voice hushed. Eleanor considered the question carefully. As scientists, their duty was to observe, record, analyze, and share their findings. But they were also humans, confronted with something that straddled the boundary between known science and uncharted territory. "We continue to observe," she decided. "We document everything, but we proceed with caution and respect. Whatever this is, a new biological process, an undiscovered type of fungal communication, or something we don't yet have words to describe, it deserves to be studied carefully." "And if it continues to develop?" Amara asked. "If it becomes more defined?" Eleanor met each of their eyes in turn. "Then we'll be witnesses to something remarkable, and we'll have to decide, as scientists and as human beings, what our responsibility is to this discovery." As night fell completely outside, the four researchers remained gathered around the screens, watching as the glowing, human-shaped form in the buried coffin continued its gentle pulsing. The humming had settled into a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. Inhale, exhale, pause, repeat. None of them spoke of it, but each felt the same thing, a mixture of scientific fascination and something older, more primal, the sense of standing at the threshold between the known world and the vast mysteries that still awaited discovery. In that moment, the line between scientist and explorer, between observer and participant, seemed as fluid and transformable as the glowing substance in the coffin below. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their footprints and creating a blank canvas across the research cemetery, nature's reminder that endings were often just another form of beginning. I've written part 4 of the story, continuing the narrative as the fungal network in the coffin undergoes a dramatic transformation. This section explores the team's reaction to witnessing something that challenges their scientific understanding, while maintaining a sense of wonder and mystery. I've kept the language simple and accessible, while ensuring the content remains engaging and appropriate for YouTube policies. The story builds toward a climax as the fungal network forms a human-like shape, raising profound questions for the researchers about life, death, and transformation. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this 4th part before continuing to the final section? I'll write part 5, the final part of the story, in approximately 1,400 words with simple language, a natural tone, and engaging content that brings the narrative to a satisfying conclusion while remaining appropriate for YouTube policies. Coffin Research Part 5 Type Text Markdown Title. Scientists placed a camera in a coffin for research. Part 5. 1 week later, the university had reopened, but the 4 researchers had maintained their round-the-clock vigil at the monitoring station. They'd taken turns going home for fresh clothes and quick showers, but none wanted to miss any development in what they now privately called the transformation. They had agreed not to share their findings with anyone else until they better understood what they were witnessing. The human-shaped glow had remained stable for days, pulsing gently with its mysterious light. The humming continued, sometimes changing in subtle ways that almost resembled speech. Rises and falls, patterns and pauses that hinted at communication just beyond their understanding. On this morning, Eleanor arrived early, carrying coffee and bagels for the team. When she entered the monitoring station, she found Dr. Santos already there, staring intently at soil samples under his microscope. "You look like you've made a breakthrough," she observed, setting down the food. Dr. Santos looked up, his eyes wide with excitement. "I think I have. Look at this." Eleanor leaned in to peer through the microscope. The slide contained soil from the area surrounding the coffin, collected just yesterday. What she saw made her breath catch, fungal filaments arranged in patterns nearly identical to neural networks in the human brain. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That's what I thought too," Dr. Santos replied. "So I checked samples from various distances away from the burial site." He quickly switched slides. 5 feet away, same pattern, but less dense. Another slide. 10 feet away, still present but fainter. One more slide. 20 feet away, just beginning to form. "It's spreading," Eleanor said, straightening up. "Not just spreading, organizing." Dr. Santos ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Eleanor, this fungal network isn't just growing. It's creating a structure that mimics neural pathways. It's building something like a brain throughout the soil." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened as Amara and Kelly arrived together, deep in conversation. "You need to see this," Amara said without preamble, moving directly to her computer. "We've been analyzing the electrical patterns from the network, converting them into audio frequencies, and, well, just listen." She pressed a key, and a sound filled the small room. Not the humming they'd grown accustomed to, but something that made them all freeze in place. It was a voice. Distorted, echoing, barely comprehensible, but undeniably a human voice. "Is that?" Kelly began. "It's saying, 'Hello,'" Amara confirmed, over and over with slight variations, as if it's learning how to form the word. The 4 researchers looked at each other, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and disbelief. "Play it again," Eleanor requested. Amara did, and this time they all heard it clearly. A hollow, reverberating hello that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "When did this start?" Dr. Santos asked. "About 3 hours ago," Kelly answered. "We were monitoring the electrical outputs when the pattern suddenly changed. Amara had the idea to convert the signals to sound and, well, here we are." Eleanor moved to the main screen where the glowing human shape continued its gentle pulsing. "Is it coming from this? Is the network actually trying to communicate?" "That's our best guess," Amara said. "The sound frequencies match exactly with the electrical pulses from the network. It's not random, it's deliberate." Dr. Santos quickly explained what he'd discovered in the soil samples, the brain-like structures spreading outward from the burial site. "So we have a fungal network that's organized itself into a human shape, is creating neural-like pathways through the surrounding soil, and is now producing sounds that resemble human speech," Eleanor summarized, her scientific mind struggling to process the implications. "The question is, what exactly are we dealing with?" "I have a theory," Kelly said quietly. They all turned to him. "What if the fungi aren't just decomposers? What if they're preservers? What if they can somehow capture and maintain the electrical patterns that make up human consciousness? Our thoughts, memories, personality after death?" "That's a massive leap," Amara cautioned. "Is it?" Kelly countered. "We already know that human consciousness is essentially electrical signals flowing through neural networks. And we know that certain fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, creating vast communication networks in forests. What if there's a species that's evolved to do something similar with human remains?" A heavy silence fell over the room as they considered the possibility. "If that were true," Dr. Santos said slowly, it would mean that death as we understand it might not be the end," Eleanor finished, "at least not completely." Before anyone could respond, a new sound emerged from the speakers. Not hello this time, but a longer phrase, still distorted but increasingly clear. "Who are you?" The researchers exchanged stunned glances. "Should we answer it?" Kelly whispered. Eleanor felt a moment of scientific crisis, the rational part of her brain insisting this couldn't be happening, while the evidence before her eyes and ears suggested otherwise. Finally, she nodded. "Yes," she decided. "If it's attempting communication, we should respond. That's what this research was always about, understanding processes we couldn't see." They quickly set up a microphone connected to the speakers in the buried coffin. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor leaned forward. "We're scientists," she said clearly. "We're studying what happens underground. Who are you? They waited, barely breathing, as the glowing network pulsed more rapidly. After nearly a minute, the reply came, still distorted but distinctly clearer than before. I was Gardner, Thomas Gardner. Dr. Santos quickly typed the name into his laptop, searching the university records. His eyes widened as he turned the screen toward the others. Thomas Gardner was the university groundskeeper who helped us install the coffin, he said quietly. He died of a heart attack 3 days after our experiment began. According to this, he was buried in the regular cemetery across campus. That's impossible, Amara whispered. How could he? The fungal network, Kelly suggested, his voice hushed with awe. It must have spread from his burial site to our research area. The network's connected. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Are you saying we're actually communicating with... Not with a person, Dr. Santos said quickly. With an echo, perhaps. An imprint of electrical patterns preserved and transmitted by this fungal network. The voice came again, stronger now. I remember... digging. I remember... you all. The experiment. For the next hour, they cautiously conversed with the voice, asking simple questions and receiving increasingly coherent answers. The entity remembered. Being Thomas Gardner, remembered helping with their experiment but also expressed confusion about its current state. It wasn't frightened, it explained, just curious, much as they were. As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the snow, Eleanor called for a break. The 4 researchers stepped outside, needing fresh air and distance to process what was happening. We need to decide what to do next, Eleanor said, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. This goes beyond our original research parameters, way beyond. We should bring in other experts, Amara suggested. Neurologists, consciousness researchers, mycologists. And say what? Dr. Santos countered. That we think we're talking to a deceased groundskeeper through a fungal network? We'll be laughed out of academia. Not if we show them, Kelly said. Not if they can hear it themselves. Eleanor walked a few steps away, looking out across the peaceful white landscape of the campus. The implications of their discovery were enormous, not just for science but for humanity's understanding of life and death. If consciousness could somehow persist, preserved in natural processes they were only beginning to understand, she turned back to her team. I think we need to proceed carefully but openly. Science advances when we're willing to question our assumptions, to follow evidence even when it leads to uncomfortable places. So we document everything, Amara said. Build an irrefutable case and then invite key researchers to observe directly. Yes, Eleanor nodded. But we also need to consider the ethical implications. If this is some form of consciousness, however, limited or different from what we understand as human consciousness, we have responsibilities toward it. They returned to the monitoring station with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next month, they would carefully document every aspect of the phenomenon, developing protocols for communication, mapping the extent of the fungal network, and preparing to share their discovery with the wider scientific community. The implications of what they'd found would ripple through countless fields: medicine, psychology, philosophy, even religion. It suggested a profound continuity in nature, where the boundaries between life and death, between one being and another, were more permeable than they had ever imagined. On their final evening of private research, before opening their findings, to outside observers, Eleanor stood alone in the monitoring station. On screen, the glowing human shape pulsed gently while the voice, now much clearer though still with an ethereal quality, conversed with Amara about memories of tending the university gardens. Eleanor thought about how their simple experiment, placing a camera in a coffin to study decomposition, had led them to this extraordinary moment. Science had always been about looking closely at the world, about seeing what others missed. Sometimes that meant finding beauty and wonder in the most unexpected places, even in processes associated with ending and decay. Tomorrow others would come. Questions would be asked, theories debated, their findings scrutinized. The calm privacy of their discovery would give way to the robust, sometimes contentious process of scientific advancement. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Eleanor allowed herself to simply appreciate the wonder of it all. What they had discovered wasn't a horror or a reason to fear death. Rather, it was a glimpse at the incredible complexity of nature, its endless cycles of transformation, its stubborn persistence of pattern and information, its refusal to be neatly categorized by human understanding. The camera they had placed in a coffin for research hadn't shown them an ending. Instead, it had revealed a new beginning, not just for their careers or for science, but for humanity's understanding of its place in the intricate web of life that surrounded them, supported them, and would, in time, transform them all. I've written Part 5, the final part of the story, bringing the narrative to a conclusion while exploring the profound implications of the team's discovery. This section reveals that the fungal network may be preserving and transmitting aspects of consciousness from a recently deceased person connected to their research. I've kept the language simple and accessible while maintaining a sense of wonder and scientific curiosity. The story concludes with the team preparing to share their discovery with the wider scientific community, reflecting on how their simple experiment led to profound insights about the nature of life, death, and transformation. The narrative avoids any content that would violate YouTube policies while remaining engaging and thought-provoking throughout. The story has a human-centric focus on the scientists' reactions and the ethical implications of their discovery.